Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Now, for a moment, let's stand with those women at the mouth of that empty tomb. What do you do when all of your plans go out the window? How do you live when the center of your life is gone? There is no old life to go back to. All the plans and purposes, all the hopes and dreams have evaporated. The world keeps turning. The sun comes up. Other people go back to their lives. But you can't. What do you do when there's no old life left? The choices are stark and simple. You can stand at the tomb, but the tomb is familiar, futile, fatal. Is that yours? No, I know. Hannah. It bounced off the pew. Maybe it'll come rolling back down again. New life is unexpected, surprising, unfamiliar, terrifying. We'd really like a third choice between that old life that's gone and that new life that is so uncertain, but there isn't one. We don't hear the women say anything at the end of this gospel, and yet someone must have said something. Here we are. As Barbara Brown Taylor has written, the women came to conduct a funeral, not to launch a revolution. They came to grieve the death of a friend, not to organize a movement. What they grieved was the death of hope, the death of what they thought would happen. The future that they had imagined was gone forever. Listen to the good news that they get. The path that you expected is not there. There is a new path to the future, and it's time to hit the road. Jesus is not here. He has gone ahead of you. He has gone ahead of you to Galilee. Easter is all about going ahead. Now, here's what we Christians believe about Easter. On Good Friday, Jesus died. He didn't just take a 3-day weekend. He took everything that sin and evil could dish out. He absorbed it all. Death took its best shot and lost. And we know that because the tomb was empty that first Easter. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
Now you have to stay alert during this message, you know. Jesus' earthly body was completely used up in that final battle with the evil one. And God raised up His Son in a new body that cannot die. Jesus, the Messiah, is the beginning of God's new creation. The down payment on all that God wishes to do. The prototype for what life is like in that new creation. Pain and suffering will be no more. Mourning and crying will be a thing of the past. Death itself will die. And all of creation will live the life that God has always intended. Today we celebrate the beginning of that new creation among us. The world wants to deny Easter, but it cannot. 40 years ago, the Soviet Union was still in existence. It had not yet dissolved, and it was an officially atheistic regime. The premier of the Soviet Union, Leonid Brezhnev, had died, and dignitaries and world leaders were invited to the funeral. Our president, George Bush Sr., attended, and he was next to Mrs. Brezhnev at the time when she took her final viewing before the casket was closed. And former President Bush stood there, and she leaned over, and she lovingly traced the sign of the cross on her dead husband's chest. Even in that fortress of atheism, that haven for hopelessness, Easter had broken through. Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
But, as they say in the infomercials, there's more. Easter is the beginning of it all, and we live as Easter people. We work to make that new life a reality in our homes, in our churches, in our communities, and in our world. When God sees fit, this world will be done. But nothing good will be lost. Every good and loving and compassionate and joyful and hopeful act will be taken up into the new creation. Nothing good will be lost. God will raise up that new creation. What we see in Jesus now will be true for all of creation in the end. Jesus goes ahead of us into the new life. Ahead of us. And he invites us to follow him there. William Willimon, one of my favorite preachers, says that the most curious quality of salvation in Jesus is his refusal to stay put. Jesus invites us to join him on the road to the new creation. Willimon concludes that people who follow Jesus must be willing to relocate. One of my pastor friends shares this story. One of his little parishioners, Mark, was 3 years old, and Mark's pet lizard had died. This was Mark's first experience of death of someone or something that he loved, and so his grandma Marie suggested that they have a funeral for the lizard. The boys, his older brother and Mark, thought that was a good idea, but they weren't quite sure what a funeral was, and so grandma explained that this is a little ceremony where you say a prayer and sing a song, and then you bury the one who's died. Well, Granny gave them a shoebox and prepared a burial site in the backyard. The older boy said a prayer, and then he turned to Mark, and he said, Mark, why don't you sing a song? The lizard's name was Jack, and so Mark broke into his favorite song about Jack. Hit the road, Jack, and don't you come back. Little Mark was closer to the target than you might think. The angel told the women, he is not here. He has gone ahead of you to Galilee. Jesus has gone there. We can't leave Jesus behind. He's always ahead of us. And it's not his job to wait for us. It's our job to buck up and to catch up. The empty tomb is the answer to our prayer that God's kingdom will come on earth as it is in heaven. So Easter is relentlessly oriented to the future. There's an ancient legend in the church called the Quo Vadis legend. And it comes from some of the earliest days of the Christian church. In about 63 AD, the Emperor Nero engaged in a persecution of Christians in Rome. The Apostle Peter was there, and he was urged by other Christians to flee the city so that he could continue his leadership. Peter took that advice, and as he was hurrying down the Appian Way out of Rome, he had a vision. And in that vision, he saw Jesus, the risen Jesus, hurrying the opposite direction back into Rome. And Peter said to Jesus, Quo vadis Domine? That's Latin for, where are you going, Lord? And Jesus replies, I am going into the city to be crucified once more for my people. And the legend has it that Peter then turned around and went back into the city and was crucified He was crucified upside down, church practice has it, because he felt unworthy to be executed in the same way as his Lord. Whether this happened or not is really beside the point. But it reminds us to ask the same question. Where are you going, Lord? Because wherever it is, we're called to follow. Jesus is always going ahead of us into the lives of those who need Him. He's going ahead of us to care for the sick, to feed the hungry, to love the lonely, to embrace the untouchables. He is not retreating inside the walls of safety and security. He is not seeking an escape from this world. He is going ahead of us to die so that we might live. And our challenge today is simple. Will we follow? Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. Hallelujah.
As you're able, in joy and celebration, I